Okay. So let's do the second reading of Schlick. Oh no. Hold on a second. I forgot where we left off. Ah, shoot. Okay, let's try this again. Oh my goodness, bear with me. I'm so sorry. All right. I forgot where we left off. Dear Lord. All right. Well, we're not going to get the answer. So I might have to rebuild the entire thing. Freedom and indeterminism. We read that. The nature of moral responsibility. We read that. The consciousness of responsibility. I think that's where we left off. Okay. Hopefully this is correct. But much more important than the question of when a man is said to be responsible is that of when he himself feels responsible. Clearly, we haven't read that yet. Let me just be sure. Yeah, good. This is where we are. Okay. Our whole treatment would be untenable if it gave no explanation of this. So we're going to have to answer that question too. It is then a welcome confirmation of the view here developed that the subjective feeling of responsibility coincides with objective judgment. It is a fact of experience that in general, the person blamed or condemned is conscious of the fact that he was rightly taken into account. Of course, under the supposition that no error has been made, that the assumed state of affairs actually occurred. What is this consciousness of having been the true doer of the act, the actual instigator? Evidently, not merely that it was he who took the steps required for its performance, but that there must be added the awareness that he did it independently of his own initiative, or however it be expressed. This feeling is simply the consciousness of freedom, which is merely the knowledge of having acted on one's own desires, and one's own desires are those which have their origin in the regularity of one's character in the given situation and are not imposed by an external power, as explained above. The absence of the external power expresses itself in the well-known feeling, usually considered characteristic of the consciousness of freedom, that one could have acted otherwise. How this indubitable experience ever came to be an argument in favor of indeterminism is incomprehensible to me. You can't even understand how the libertarians are making this mistake. It is, of course, obvious that it should have acted, or the determinists for thinking that that would break determinism. It is, of course, obvious that I should have acted differently had I willed something else, but the feeling never says that I could also have willed something else, even though this is true, if, that is, other motives had been present. And it says even less that under exactly the same inner and outer conditions, I could also have willed something else. How could such a feeling inform me of anything regarding the purely theoretical question of whether the principle of causality holds or not? Of course, after what has been said on the subject, and I do not undertake to demonstrate the principle, but I do deny that from any such fact of consciousness the least follows regarding the principle's validity. This feeling is not the consciousness of the absence of a cause, but of something altogether different, namely of freedom, which consists in the fact that I can act as I desire. Thus, the feeling of responsibility assumes that I acted freely, that my own desires impelled me. And if, because of this feeling, I willingly suffer blame for my behavior or reproach myself and thereby admit that I might have acted otherwise, this means that other behavior was compatible with the laws of volition, of course, granted other motives. And I myself desire the existence of such motives and bear the pain, regret, and sorrow caused me by my behavior so that its repetition will be prevented. To blame oneself means just to apply a motive of improvement to oneself, which is usually the task of the educator. But if, for example, one does something under the influence of torture, feelings of guilt and regret are absent. For one knows that according to the laws of volition, no other behavior was possible. No matter what ideas, because of their feeling tones, might have functioned as motives. The important thing always is that the feeling of responsibility means the realization that oneself, one's own psychic processes, constitute the point at which motives must be applied in order to govern the acts of one's body. Before we read the last section, let's pause there really quickly. You see how the regularity of your choices and the predictability based on knowledge of your character for how you will act is necessary. It's needed for Schlick's view of us having any freedom at all. It doesn't mean what most determinists and what the metaphysical libertarians think it means, which is that you're not free. Notice also that he thinks that the metaphysical libertarians are making a mistake, and the mistake could be illustrated as follows. You want real freedom, do you? You want true freedom. You want freedom so that I couldn't predict how you were going to act. You want freedom that breaks the descriptive principles of causality as applied through psychological laws, whatever they may be, if we find out what they are, that would allow someone with total knowledge to know how you're going to act before you even know how you're going to act, because you're not even yet in the situation. You want that. You want that, do you? Okay. Because that would be real freedom, would it? But then you would be acting in a way that was incomprehensibly disconnected from everything that you are and everything around you. You would call that freedom? That seems like insanity. I would be less inclined to say you're the cause of your actions if I couldn't understand why you did what you did and what that says about you and what I know about you to be able to predict what you're going to do. Where's your moral responsibility? Where's your freedom then? You want something that breaks determinism because you misunderstand that you think determinism compels when really it just describes. But if you want to get rid of determinism as it describes, I'm less sure that you're the source of anything. It seems like you're just a random bubble in an ocean of chaotic things that just are happening and no one can make sense of where or why. That's not the freedom you're looking for. He thinks, Schlick, I'm talking like Schlick, I'm not saying I agree, but Schlick thinks the freedom you want is found in determinism. That's the compatibilist view of his. The freedom you want requires determinism. And it's freedom, and ethics requires freedom, and the freedom's there. You don't get the freedom if you misunderstand that determinism means you're compelled, because it doesn't. But you also don't get the freedom if you break the descriptive principles of determinism and say anything could happen. Where's your freedom then? He said that's not the kind of freedom you want. So it's always relying on that. Okay, let's go to the last section. Excuse me, I should hit mute when I cough like that. Causality as the presupposition of responsibility. We can speak of motives only in a causal context. Thus, it becomes clear how very much of the concept of responsibility rests upon that of causation. Rests upon it. That is, upon the regularity of volition decisions. In fact, if we should conceive of a decision as utterly without any cause, this would, in all strictness, be the indeterministic preposition or presupposition. Then the act would be entirely a matter of chance, for chance is identical with the absence of a cause. There is no other opposite of causality. That's the real opposite of causality, is chance, randomness. Could we, under such circumstances, make the agent responsible? Certainly not. Imagine a man, always calm, peaceful, and blameless, who suddenly falls upon and begins to beat a stranger. He is held and questioned regarding the motive of his actions, to which he answers, in his opinion truthfully, as we assume, "There was no motive for my behavior. Try as I may, I can discover no reason. My volition was without any cause. I desired to do so, and there is simply nothing else to be said about it." We should shake our heads and call him insane, because we have to believe that there was a cause, and lacking any other, we must assume some mental disturbance as the only cause remaining. But certainly no one would hold him to be responsible. He lost his moral responsibility if he got what you think you need, which is this sort of disconnected, disembodied, free from principles of causality kind of agency. If decisions are causeless, there would be no sense in trying to influence men. And we see at once that this is the reason why we could not bring such a man to account, but would always have only a shrug of the shoulders to answer for his behavior. One can easily determine that in practice, we make an agent the more responsible, the more motives we can find for his conduct. Hey, come here, stop making noises. Oh, you're sleeping, baby. That poor dog. He's having a nightmare. I'm sorry. If a man guilty of an atrocity was an enemy of his victim, if previously he had shown violent tendencies, if some special circumstances angered him, then we impose severe punishment upon him. While the fewer the reasons to be found for an offense, the less do we condemn the agent. But make unlucky chance, a momentary aberration, or something of the sort responsible. We do not find the causes of misconduct in his character, and therefore we do not try to influence it for the better. Right? So we're looking for the cause of the bad action. It's not him if he has no reasons for doing it. It's insanity or craziness or randomness or something else. This and only this is the significance of the fact that we do not put the responsibility upon him. And he too feels this to be so and says, "I cannot understand how such a thing could have happened to me." In general, we know very well how to discover the causes of conduct in the characters of our fellow men, and how to use this knowledge in the prediction of their future behavior. Often, with as much certainty as that with which we know that a lion and a rabbit will behave quite differently in the same situation. From all this, it is evident that in practice, no one thinks of questioning the principle of causality. That, thus, the attitude of the practical man offers no excuse to the metaphysician for confusing freedom from compulsion with the absence of a cause. Don't make that mistake anymore, he says. They're different. If one makes clear to himself that a causeless happening is identical with a chance happening, and that consequently an indetermined will would destroy all responsibility, then every desire will cease that might be father to an indeterministic thought. Don't make the analogous flip side of the coin distinction mistake either, right? Don't think that causality, regularity is compulsion, and don't think that randomness and chance is true freedom. Both of those are mistakes. They're in different realms, so far different. He says it's incomprehensible to me that we're even making this mistake, he says earlier. All right. And so if you understand that, you'll get rid of anything that would make you want to be indeterministic in the first place, and you'll get rid of the determinist's most often made mistake that there is no freedom. If you understand the distinction and the analogous one, the flip side coin one that he's tried to point out. Okay. No one can prove determinism, but it is certain that we assume its validity in all our practical life, and that particular, we can apply the concept of responsibility to human conduct only insofar as the causal principle holds of volitional processes, right? The causal principle must work inside your skull as well as outside, he says. But the causal principle is nothing like a law that makes you act. So don't deny determinism. Just recognize that it doesn't abolish your freedom. This is what we mean by compatibilists. They think the two are compatible. For a final clarification, I bring together again a list of these concepts which tend, in the traditional treatment of the problem of freedom, to be confused. In the place of these concepts on the left are put mistakenly those of the right. And those in the vertical order form a chain that sometimes the previous confusion is the cause of that which follows. Okay, what the hell, man? Can you be a little more straightforward? Let me read that again. In the place of these concepts on the left are put mistakenly those on the right, and those in the vertical order form a chain so that sometimes the previous confusion is the cause of that which follows. Okay, natural law is confused as a law of the state. Determinism, causality, is therefore confused as compulsion. Universal validity is confused as necessity. If you understand what natural law actually is as descriptor, you won't make that mistake. If you understand what determinism is and causality, that it has no compulsion in it, you won't make that mistake. If you understand that it means universal validity and not it's necessary so you will do it, then you won't make that mistake. Indeterminism, chance, is confused with freedom. So you make that mistake. No cause is confused with no compulsion. Okay? He says, let's accept natural law. Let's accept determinism and causality. Let's accept universal validity of the causal principles that we use to describe things. Let's accept that indeterminism is not freedom. He really should have switched them. He should have said, let's accept freedom and not confuse it with indeterminism. Interesting, because he's trying to keep a chain of the mistakes we're making. We're making a mistake about indeterminism. But he should have said, let's accept freedom and not confuse it with a desire for randomness and chance. And let's look for no compulsion in ethical discussions to find the morally responsible agent. Let's not look for no cause, because if there was no cause, he certainly would be not responsible, or no one would be. All right, so with that, we're done with the second reading. We are on Tuesday going to go over Schlick and his compatibilism in our Tuesday class. So I'll see you there.